The Desert Star Motel stood like a forgotten monument along Route 66 in the Mojave Desert of California, its neon sign flickering intermittently against the vast expanse of sand and sagebrush that stretched toward the horizon. On the evening of August 15, 1987, this unremarkable roadside establishment would become the center of one of America's most baffling missing persons cases. The motel, built in 1962 during the height of Route 66's popularity, had seen better days by the mid-1980s. The once vibrant turquoise and pink paint scheme had faded to pale pastels under the relentless desert sun, and the kidney-shaped swimming pool had been drained and covered years earlier due to maintenance costs. Despite its decline, the Desert Star still served its primary function, providing affordable overnight accommodations for travelers making the long journey across the American Southwest. On that August evening, the motel's guest registry showed only 3 occupied rooms out of 24 available units. The sparse occupancy was typical for a weeknight during the off-season, when the desert heat kept most tourists away and only the most determined travelers braved the scorching temperatures. Among the guests that night were the Thompson family from Portland, Oregon, Robert Thompson, 34, an insurance salesman, his wife Linda, 32, an elementary school teacher, and their 8-year-old twin sons, Jason and Jeremy. The family was on the 3rd day of a cross-country vacation, driving from their home in the Pacific Northwest to visit Linda's parents in Phoenix, Arizona. The twins were identical in almost every way that mattered. Both had sandy brown hair that seemed to defy every attempt at combing, bright blue eyes that sparkled with mischief, and the same spattering of freckles across their noses. They shared the telepathic connection that many twins claim to possess, often finishing each other's sentences and seeming to communicate through looks alone. Jason, older by 12 minutes, was the more outgoing of the two. He possessed a natural leadership quality that drew other children to him and made adults smile with his confident charm. Jeremy was quieter and more thoughtful, preferring to observe before acting, but he possessed an intuitive intelligence that often surprised adults with its depth. The family had checked into room 17 at approximately 6:30 p.m. after driving for 8 hours through increasingly desolate landscape. The room was typical of budget motels of the era. 2 double beds with faded floral bedspreads, a small table with mismatched chairs, a color television mounted high on the wall, and a window air conditioning unit that rattled constantly but provided blessed relief from the 108-degree heat outside. Robert Thompson had specifically requested a ground-floor room when making the reservation, partly for convenience with luggage, but mainly because Linda had a mild phobia about staying in elevated rooms at unfamiliar places. The family had developed a routine during their cross-country trip: arrive at the motel, unpack essential items, find a restaurant for dinner, return to the room for television and early sleep, then rise early to beat the worst heat of the following day. The evening had proceeded exactly according to their established pattern. After settling into room 17, the family had driven 3 miles to a truck stop diner that Robert had spotted on their approach to the motel. The boys had been excited to see real long-haul truckers and had peppered their father with questions about the massive vehicles parked outside. Dinner had been unremarkable but satisfying. Hamburgers and French fries for the boys, a club sandwich for Linda, and chicken fried steak for Robert. The twins had been well behaved throughout the meal, although they had shown signs of the restless energy that comes from spending long hours confined in a car. The family returned to the Desert Star Motel at approximately 8:45 p.m., just as the desert sunset was painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. The boys had immediately begun lobbying for permission to explore the motel grounds, but Linda had firmly insisted that they stay close to the room. "Boys, we've talked about this," Linda had said as they entered room 17. "We don't know this area, and I want you where I can see you. The compromise reached was that Jason and Jeremy could play in the small paved area directly in front of their room, within sight of the large window, while their parents organized luggage and planned the next day's route. The boys had been happy with this arrangement and had immediately begun an elaborate game involving a rubber ball they had brought from home. Robert Thompson had spent the next hour studying road maps and calculating driving times, while Linda had hand-washed some clothes in the bathroom sink and hung them to dry on the motel's complimentary plastic hangers. Through the window, they could periodically see the boys playing their ball game, their laughter carrying clearly through the thin walls of the motel room. At approximately 9:45 p.m., Linda had called the boys inside for baths and preparation for bed. Both Jason and Jeremy had protested mildly, but they were clearly tired from the long day of travel and submitted to the evening routine without serious resistance. The boys had taken turns in the small bathroom, brushing their teeth with the travel-sized toothbrushes their mother had packed, and changing into the matching Superman pajamas that had been their own choice when shopping for the trip. Linda had been particularly amused by their insistence on identical sleepwear, seeing it as another example of their mysterious twin connection. By 10:30 p.m., both boys were settled in one of the double beds, sharing the space as they preferred to do despite having a second bed available. Robert and Linda had learned not to fight this preference, recognizing that the twins found comfort in each other's presence, especially in unfamiliar environments. Robert had turned on the television, finding a rerun of The A-Team that held the boys' attention for the final minutes before sleep. Linda had been reading a paperback novel she had picked up at a gas station earlier in the day, occasionally glancing over to make sure the boys were settling down properly. At 11:15 p.m., both parents had confirmed that Jason and Jeremy were fast asleep. The boys were curled up together in the center of the bed, Jason's arm protectively draped over his brother's shoulder in a position that had been their standard sleeping arrangement since infancy. Linda had turned off the television and the main room light, leaving only the bathroom light on with the door slightly ajar, creating a soft glow that would help orient anyone who needed to get up during the night. Robert had checked the door locks and the window air conditioning unit before settling into the second bed with his wife. The couple had talked quietly for a few minutes about their planned arrival time in Phoenix and their excitement about seeing Linda's parents, who hadn't seen the twins since Christmas. Linda had mentioned that she was looking forward to having a few days of relaxation while the boys enjoyed time with their grandparents. Both Robert and Linda had fallen asleep sometime around midnight, exhausted from the long day of driving and the accumulated fatigue of 3 days on the road. The air conditioning unit had cycled on and off throughout the night, and the occasional sound of trucks passing on the highway had provided a distant white noise that helped mask any small sounds from other parts of the motel. At approximately 6:30 a.m. on August 16, 1987, Linda Thompson had awakened to use the bathroom. As she passed the boys' bed in the dim light filtering through the curtains, she'd glanced over to check on Jason and Jeremy, as was her maternal habit. The bed was empty. Linda's first assumption was that one or both boys had gotten up to use the bathroom, but a quick check showed that the small room was unoccupied. Fighting down a momentary panic, she had quickly searched the entire motel room, looking under beds, in the small closet, and even behind the heavy curtains. Jason and Jeremy were nowhere to be found. "Robert!" Linda had whispered urgently, shaking her husband awake. "The boys aren't in their bed." Robert had immediately sat up, his mind still foggy with sleep, but rapidly clearing as the implications of Linda's words registered. "What do you mean they're not in their bed?" "I mean they're gone, Robert. They're not in the room." A frantic search of the room had confirmed Linda's observation. Both boys had vanished, but their disappearance made no logical sense. Their pajamas were still in the room, neatly folded on the chair where Linda had placed them the night before. Their tennis shoes were still by the door where they had left them. Even their beloved rubber ball was still sitting on the small table. Most puzzling of all, the room showed no signs of disturbance. The door was still locked from the inside, with both the main lock and the security chain engaged. The window was closed and locked, and the air conditioning unit showed no signs of having been moved or tampered with. Robert had immediately checked the bathroom again, hoping against logic that somehow he had missed the boys during Linda's initial search. But the small space was clearly empty, and there was nowhere in the tiny room where two 8-year-old children could possibly hide. "This doesn't make sense," Robert had said, his voice tight with growing panic. "How could they have gotten out without unlocking the door?" Linda had been checking and rechecking the boys' belongings, hoping to find some clue about where they might have gone. But everything was exactly as it had been the night before. Their clothes for the next day laid out on the second bed, their small backpacks containing toys and books undisturbed, even their toothbrushes still damp from the previous evening's use. At 6:45 a.m., Robert had made the decision to contact the motel management. He had dressed quickly and gone to the office, where he found the night clerk, a tired-looking man in his 60s named Earl Peterson, who had been dozing in a chair behind the front desk. "Sir, I need help," Robert had said, his voice strained but controlled. "My 2 sons are missing from our room." Peterson had immediately become alert, recognizing the seriousness of the situation. "Missing? What do you mean, missing?" "They were in our room when we went to sleep last night, and this morning they're gone. The door was still locked, the window was closed, but they're not there." Peterson had accompanied Robert back to room 17, where Linda was continuing her increasingly frantic search of the small space. The night clerk had examined the room carefully, checking the same areas that the parents had already searched multiple times. "Ma'am, sir," Peterson had said after completing his inspection, "I've been working nights at this motel for 12 years, and I've never seen anything like this. There's no way 2 children could have left this room without unlocking the door or opening the window." At 7 a.m., Peterson had called the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Office to report the missing children. The dispatcher had immediately classified the call as a high-priority missing persons case involving minors, and had promised that deputies would be dispatched immediately. While waiting for the police to arrive, Peterson had begun his own investigation of the motel grounds. He had checked every unlocked room, the office, the utility areas, and the covered pool, but found no trace of the missing boys. More mysteriously, Peterson had reviewed the guest registry and determined that only 2 other rooms had been occupied that night. Room 3, which housed an elderly couple from Kansas who were clearly too frail to be involved in any kind of incident, and Room 24, which had been rented to a traveling salesman who had checked out at 5:30 a.m. and was already many miles away. Deputy Sheriff Maria Santos had arrived at the Desert Star Motel at 7:35 a.m., followed 10 minutes later by Detective Frank Morrison from the Sheriff's Missing Persons Unit. Both officers had extensive experience with missing children cases, but they had immediately recognized that this situation was unlike anything in their professional experience. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson," Detective Morrison had said after introducing himself, "I need to ask you some specific questions about last night. I know this is difficult, but the first few hours are critical in missing children cases." The detective had conducted separate interviews with both parents, looking for any inconsistencies in their accounts or any details that might provide clues about what had happened to the boys. Both Robert and Linda had provided identical accounts of the previous evening's events, and their obvious distress and genuine confusion had quickly convinced the investigators that the parents were not involved in their children's disappearance. "Detective Morrison," Linda had asked during her interview, "how is it possible for 2 children to just vanish from a locked room? It doesn't make any sense." "Ma'am, I have to be honest with you. In 23 years of police work, I've never encountered a situation quite like this. But I want you to know that we're going to use every resource available to find Jason and Jeremy. A systematic search of the motel and the surrounding area had begun immediately. Additional deputies had arrived to assist with the search, and the California Highway Patrol had been notified to watch for two missing 8-year-old twins. The physical search had expanded in concentric circles from room 17, covering the entire motel property, the adjacent desert areas, and eventually extending to a radius of several miles. Search teams had looked for footprints, clothing, toys, or any other evidence that might indicate which direction the boys had gone. But the desert sand around the motel had yielded no footprints, despite the fact that two children walking barefoot should have left clear tracks in the soft surface. The absence of any physical evidence had been one of the most puzzling aspects of the case from the very beginning. A thorough examination of room 17 had been conducted by crime scene technicians who had dusted for fingerprints, photographed every inch of the space, and tested for any evidence of forced entry or struggle. The room had been processed as carefully as a major crime scene, but had yielded no clues about how the boys had disappeared. The fingerprint analysis had revealed exactly what would be expected: prints from the Thompson family members, as well as older prints from previous guests and motel staff. There were no unidentified prints and no signs that anyone else had been in the room during the night. Most significantly, the crime scene team had confirmed that the room's door and window locks had been functioning normally and showed no signs of tampering. The door had definitely been locked from the inside when Robert had awakened, and the security chain had been engaged. The window lock had been secure, and the heavy air conditioning unit had not been moved. "Detective," the lead crime scene technician had reported, "we've been over this room inch by inch. There's no physical evidence that anyone other than the family was ever in here, and there's no way those boys could have left without someone unlocking that door from the inside." By noon on August 16th, the case had attracted the attention of the FBI due to the possibility that the missing children had been transported across state lines. Special Agent Patricia Chen had arrived from the Los Angeles field office to coordinate federal involvement in the investigation. Agent Chen had brought additional resources to the search, including specialized search teams, psychological profilers, and experts in child abduction cases. But even with federal involvement, the investigation had quickly reached an apparent dead end. The motel's guest register had been scrutinized for any names or information that might provide leads. The few guests who had been present that night had been interviewed extensively, but none had seen or heard anything unusual during the evening. The traveling salesman who had checked out early had been located and interviewed in Nevada, where his alibi had been confirmed by multiple witnesses. The elderly couple from Kansas had been thoroughly investigated and cleared of any involvement. Most frustratingly, the motel had no security cameras, and the remote location meant that there were no nearby businesses or residences with surveillance systems that might have captured relevant footage. A detailed background investigation of the Thompson family had revealed no evidence of domestic problems, financial difficulties, or any other factors that might explain the children's disappearance. Robert and Linda had been model parents with no history of abuse, neglect, or other issues that might motivate someone to take their children. The boys themselves had been well-adjusted children with no history of running away or any behavioral problems that might explain why they would leave their room voluntarily. Their school records, medical records, and interviews with teachers and neighbors had painted a picture of normal, happy children from a stable family. As the investigation entered its second week, the case had begun to attract national media attention. The mysterious circumstances of the boys' disappearance, combined with the complete absence of any logical explanation, had made the story compelling to news outlets across the country. Television crews had descended on the Desert Star Motel, broadcasting live reports from the parking lot where Jason and Jeremy had played with their ball on their last evening. Newspaper reporters had interviewed motel staff, local residents, and anyone else who might have information about the case. The media attention had generated hundreds of tips and potential leads, but none had provided any useful information about the boys' whereabouts. Psychics had contacted the police with visions and predictions, but their claims had proved to be unfounded. A reward fund had been established by local businesses and concerned citizens, eventually growing to $50,000 for information leading to the safe return of Jason and Jeremy Thompson. But despite the significant amount of money involved, no credible leads had emerged. By the end of August 1987, the active search for the twins had been scaled back, although the case had remained officially open. The FBI had concluded that there was no evidence of kidnapping or foul play, but they had also been unable to develop any theory that explained how two children could simply vanish from a locked motel room. The Thompson family had remained in the area for 6 weeks, hoping desperately for some news about their sons. Robert had taken leave from his job, and Linda had arranged for a substitute teacher to cover her classes. They had spent every day working with investigators, following up on tips and searching areas that might have been missed by the official search teams. But as September had turned into October, the painful reality had become clear. Jason and Jeremy Thompson had simply vanished without a trace, leaving behind a mystery that defied every attempt at explanation. The family had eventually returned to Portland, but Robert and Linda had never truly recovered from the loss of their sons. Robert had changed careers, becoming a private investigator specializing in missing persons cases, driven by the hope that his work might somehow lead him back to his own children. Linda had struggled with depression and anxiety for years, eventually retiring early from teaching because she could no longer bear being around children who reminded her of the sons she had lost. The Desert Star Motel had continued operating for several more years, but the notoriety of the case had gradually driven away customers. Most travelers preferred to avoid the place where two children had mysteriously vanished, and the motel's reputation had never recovered. By 1995, the Desert Star had closed permanently, its rooms sealed and its neon sign permanently dark. The building had remained abandoned, slowly deteriorating under the harsh desert sun, while the mystery of Jason and Jeremy Thompson had become one of America's most famous unsolved missing persons cases. The case had been featured in numerous television documentaries, true crime books, and internet forums dedicated to unsolved mysteries. Theories had ranged from the rational to the supernatural, but none had ever been supported by credible evidence. Some investigators had suggested that the boys had somehow unlocked the door themselves and wandered into the desert, where they had become lost and died of exposure. But this theory had never explained how two 8-year-old children could have relocked the door from the outside, or why no trace of their remains had ever been found, despite extensive searches. Others had proposed that the children had been abducted by someone with a key to the room, but the motel's staff had been thoroughly investigated and cleared, and there had been no evidence that any unauthorized person had access to the room. The most exotic theories had involved everything from alien abduction to spontaneous disappearance into parallel dimensions. But these had been dismissed by serious investigators as products of public fascination rather than credible possibilities. For 37 years, Room 17 at the Desert Star Motel had remained sealed, its contents untouched since the morning that Robert and Linda Thompson had discovered their sons missing. The room had become an unofficial shrine to the missing boys, visited occasionally by family members, investigators, and curiosity seekers who had followed the case over the decades. But the desert is a place where time moves differently than in other environments, where the dry air and extreme temperatures can preserve things far longer than would be possible in other climates. And sometimes, in the vastness of the American Southwest, the past refuses to stay buried, revealing its secrets in ways that challenge everything we think we know about the nature of reality itself. The truth about Jason and Jeremy Thompson was waiting to be discovered, preserved in ways that would defy explanation and force everyone involved to reconsider their understanding of what had happened on that August night in 1987. Dr. Sarah Martinez had been documenting abandoned structures across the American Southwest for her doctoral dissertation in urban archaeology when she first encountered the Desert Star Motel on a scorching July afternoon in 2024. As a researcher at UCLA, specializing in the decay patterns of mid-20th century roadside architecture, she had visited dozens of abandoned motels, gas stations and diners along the old Route 66 corridor. But the Desert Star was different from other sites she had studied. While most abandoned buildings showed the expected signs of deterioration after nearly 3 decades of neglect, broken windows, collapsed roofs, graffiti and vandalism, the Desert Star appeared to be remarkably well preserved, as if time had somehow passed more slowly within its boundaries. Dr. Martinez had arrived at the site with her research team. Graduate student Michael Chen, who specialized in photographic documentation. Dr. James Wilson, a structural engineer who assessed the safety of buildings before exploration. And Elena Rodriguez, a preservation specialist who evaluated the historical significance of abandoned structures. "This is unusual," Dr. Wilson had observed as they approached the motel complex. "The structural integrity appears to be far better than we should expect after 30 years of desert exposure. The roof is intact, the walls show minimal cracking, and even the paint retention is extraordinary." The team had obtained proper permits from San Bernardino County to explore and document the abandoned property, which had been in legal limbo since the motel's owner had died intestate in 2003. The property had eventually reverted to county ownership, but had remained largely ignored due to its remote location and the notoriety associated with the Thompson twins case. Elena Rodriguez had been particularly interested in the Desert Star because of its connection to one of California's most famous missing persons cases. The Thompson twins' disappearance has been documented extensively in criminology and psychology literature, she had explained to her colleagues. This site represents a unique intersection of true crime history and architectural preservation. As the team had begun their systematic documentation of the property, they had immediately noticed that Room 17 was different from the other units. While most of the motel rooms had been left open and showed signs of weather damage, vandalism, and animal intrusion, Room 17 remained sealed, its door locked and its windows covered with plywood that appeared to be in perfect condition. According to the county records, Dr. Martinez had said, consulting her research files, Room 17 has been officially sealed since August 1987. No one has been authorized to enter the room since the initial police investigation. Michael Chen had begun photographing the exterior of Room 17, noting details that seemed inconsistent with the passage of time. "The paint on this door looks fresh," he had observed. "The wood shows no signs of warping or sun damage, and even the metal door handle appears to be free of corrosion." Dr. Wilson had used his engineering instruments to assess the structural condition of the sealed room. "The readings I'm getting are anomalous," he had reported. "The temperature differential between this room and the adjacent units suggests that the internal environment has remained remarkably stable. It's almost as if the room has been climate-controlled for the past 37 years. The team had attempted to contact county officials to obtain permission to open Room 17, but had encountered bureaucratic complications. The room's sealed status was tied to the ongoing missing persons case, And while the investigation had been inactive for decades, the legal paperwork required to authorize entry was complex and time-consuming. Dr. Martinez, Elena Rodriguez had suggested, we could continue documenting the rest of the property while we wait for the authorization to examine room 17. The other rooms might provide valuable comparative data. The team had spent the next 3 days systematically exploring and documenting the 23 unsealed rooms of the Desert Star Motel. What they had found had been both typical and extraordinary. The typical aspects included the expected signs of abandonment: furniture covered in dust and debris, ceiling tiles collapsed from roof leaks, bathroom fixtures corroded by mineral deposits, and extensive evidence of rodent and insect activity. But the extraordinary aspects had related to the preservation patterns throughout the complex. Despite nearly 4 decades of abandonment, many features of the motel had remained in remarkably good condition. Paint that should have faded had retained much of its original color. Metal fixtures that should have corroded extensively showed only minor oxidation. Even organic materials like curtains and carpeting had degraded far more slowly than would be expected in the harsh desert environment. There's something about this location that's affecting normal decay processes, Dr. Wilson had concluded after completing his structural analysis. The preservation we're seeing here goes beyond what would be explained by the dry desert climate alone. On their 4th day at the site, the team had received an unexpected visitor. Robert Thompson, now 71 years old, had driven from his home in Phoenix to meet with the researchers. He had learned about their work through local news coverage and had wanted to see the place where his sons had vanished 37 years earlier. Dr. Martinez, Robert had said when he introduced himself, I've followed every lead and investigation related to my boys for nearly 4 decades. I'm hoping that your research might reveal something that previous investigators missed. The meeting with Robert Thompson had been emotionally difficult for all involved. The elderly man had clearly never recovered from the loss of his sons, and his pain remained as fresh as if the disappearance had happened recently rather than decades earlier. Mr. Thompson, Dr. Martinez had said gently, our focus is on architectural documentation, but if we discover anything that might be relevant to your case, we'll immediately contact the appropriate authorities. Robert had walked around the motel property with the research team, sharing memories of that final evening with Jason and Jeremy. He had pointed out the exact spot where the boys had played with their rubber ball, the window of room 17, where Linda had watched them, and the path they had taken when walking to and from their car. They were such good boys, Robert had said, his voice heavy with decades of grief. Jason was the leader, always looking out for his brother. Jeremy was the thoughtful one, always asking questions about how things worked. They would have grown up to be remarkable men. When Robert had mentioned that he planned to visit his wife Linda's grave before returning to Phoenix, Elena Rodriguez had gently suggested that he might want to wait until the research team had completed their work. Mr. Thompson, we're still trying to get authorization to examine room 17. If we're able to open the room, would you want to be present for that? Robert's eyes had filled with tears. I've dreamed about going back into that room for 37 years. But I've also been terrified of what we might find, or what we might not find. The following week, the team had finally received authorization from San Bernardino County to open and examine room 17. The paperwork had required signatures from the district attorney's office, the sheriff's department, and 3 different county agencies, but Dr. Martinez's academic credentials and research proposal had eventually overcome the bureaucratic obstacles. On July 22, 2024, exactly 37 years and 1 week after the Thompson twins had vanished, a small group had gathered outside room 17 to witness the unsealing of the room. In addition to Dr. Martinez's research team, the group had included Robert Thompson, Detective Lisa Chen from the Sheriff's Cold Case Unit, no relation to research team member Michael Chen, County Supervisor Maria Gonzalez, and a representative from the District Attorney's Office. Before we open this room, Detective Chen had addressed the group. I want everyone to understand that this is still an active missing persons case. Anything we find inside will need to be processed according to criminal investigation protocols. Dr. Wilson had used bolt cutters to remove the heavy padlock that had secured room 17 since 1987. As the lock fell away, everyone present had felt the weight of the moment, the first time in 37 years that anyone would see the interior of the room where two 8-year-old boys had simply vanished. The door had opened smoothly, without the resistance that would be expected from a room sealed for decades, and what the group had found inside had defied every expectation they had formed about what the room would contain. Room 17 appeared exactly as it had been described in the police reports from August 16, 1987. The two double beds were still perfectly made, their floral bedspreads free of dust and showing no signs of fading. The boys' clothes for the next day remained neatly laid out on the second bed, appearing as if they had been placed there just hours earlier. "This is impossible," Detective Chen had whispered, stepping carefully into the room. "These textiles should have deteriorated completely after nearly 4 decades. The air inside room 17 had been fresh and clean, without the musty odor that would be expected in a sealed space. The temperature had been noticeably cooler than the desert heat outside, and there had been no signs of dust, debris, or insect activity. Most remarkably, the boys' personal belongings had remained exactly as they had been positioned in 1987. Their small backpacks sat on the table, their contents apparently undisturbed. Their tennis shoes remained by the door, their rubber ball sat on the nightstand, and their Superman pajamas were still folded on the chair, where Linda Thompson had placed them 37 years earlier. "Mr. Thompson," Dr. Martinez had said softly, "are these items exactly as you remember them?" Robert had nodded, tears streaming down his face. "Everything is exactly the same. It's like walking back in time to that last night." Michael Chen had begun documenting the room with his camera, but had immediately encountered technical difficulties. His digital camera had malfunctioned upon entering the room, displaying error messages that indicated sensor failures. Elena Rodriguez had experienced similar problems with her measurement instruments, which had shown readings that defied logical interpretation. "The electromagnetic environment in this room is highly unusual," Dr. Wilson had reported after checking his instruments. "I'm getting readings that suggest electromagnetic field variations that shouldn't be possible in a normal indoor environment." Detective Chen had called for additional investigative resources, recognizing that the preserved condition of room 17 represented a significant development in a case that had been dormant for decades. Within hours, a full crime scene team had arrived to process the room using modern forensic techniques that hadn't been available in 1987. But the advanced forensic equipment had proven no more effective than the researchers' instruments. Digital cameras had malfunctioned, electronic measurement devices had provided inconsistent readings, and even basic tools like digital thermometers had failed to function properly within the room. "We're going to have to document this the old-fashioned way," the lead crime scene technician had concluded. "Film cameras, manual measurement tools, and handwritten notes." Using analog equipment, the team had been able to document the extraordinary preservation of room 17. Every surface, every object, every detail had remained exactly as it had been in August 1987. Even more mysteriously, items that should have shown signs of aging had instead appeared to be frozen in time. The boys' clothes had retained their original colors and textures. Their toothbrushes in the bathroom had remained soft and pliable. Even perishable items like the remains of a candy bar in one of their backpacks had shown no signs of decay or staleness. "This level of preservation is scientifically impossible," Dr. Martinez had told Detective Chen. "We're looking at organic materials that have been completely protected from the normal processes of oxidation, UV degradation, and bacterial decomposition." The investigation had revealed even more puzzling details. The bathroom mirror had showed no signs of silvering deterioration that would be expected after decades. The television had functioned perfectly when plugged in, displaying a clear picture with no electronic degradation. Even the air conditioning unit had operated normally, as if it had been maintained regularly throughout the years of abandonment. Most disturbing of all had been the discovery of items that appeared to be more recent than 1987. A small digital watch found under one of the beds had displayed a date from 2019. A photograph tucked into one of the boys' backpacks had shown Jason and Jeremy, but they appeared to be several years older than they had been at the time of their disappearance. "Detective Chen," Robert Thompson had said, examining the photograph with trembling hands, "this picture shows my boys, but they look like they would have looked when they were 12 or 13 years old." The photograph had been professionally analyzed by forensic experts who had confirmed that it showed Jason and Jeremy Thompson, aged approximately 4 to 5 years beyond their appearance in 1987. The photograph itself had appeared to be genuine, with no evidence of digital manipulation or other alterations, but perhaps the most unsettling discovery had been a handwritten note found folded inside one of the boys' Superman comic books. The note, written in a child's handwriting that matched samples of Jeremy Thompson's schoolwork from 1987, had contained a message that seemed to be directed to whoever would eventually find the room. "We're okay," the note had read. "We found a place where time works differently. Don't worry about us. We're together and we're happy. We miss Mom and Dad, but we understand now why we had to come here. Tell them we love them and that we'll see them again someday when the time is right." The note had been dated August 20th, 1991, 4 years after the boys' disappearance. Robert Thompson had collapsed upon reading the note, overwhelmed by the implications of what his sons had apparently experienced. Detective Chen had immediately called for medical assistance, but Robert had recovered quickly, insisting that he needed to understand what the note meant. "Are you telling me," Robert had asked the investigators, "that my boys were alive 4 years after they disappeared, that they were conscious and able to write notes?" "Mr. Thompson," Detective Chen had replied carefully, "we're dealing with evidence that doesn't fit any conventional explanation. We're going to need help from experts in fields that go beyond traditional criminal investigation." The discovery in Room 17 had attracted the attention of federal authorities, who had arrived within 24 hours to take control of the investigation. Representatives from the FBI, the Department of Energy, and several other agencies had descended on the Desert Star Motel to study the anomalous preservation effects. "Dr. Martinez," FBI Special Agent Patricia Woods had said during the federal takeover, "your team has documented something that has significant implications beyond a missing persons case. We're going to need your full cooperation as we expand this investigation." The federal investigation had revealed that Room 17 existed in what could only be described as a temporal anomaly. Advanced scientific instruments, when they functioned at all within the room, had detected time distortion effects that suggested the passage of time inside the room occurred at a different rate than in the outside world. "What we're dealing with here," Dr. Elizabeth Harper, a physicist from Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, had explained to the investigative team, "appears to be a naturally occurring temporal displacement field. Time moves differently inside this room than it does in normal space." The implications of Dr. Harper's analysis had been staggering. If time moved more slowly inside room 17, then Jason and Jeremy Thompson might have experienced only a few months or years during the 37 years that had passed in the outside world. "Are you suggesting," Robert Thompson had asked Dr. Harper, "that my boys might still be alive in there somehow?" "Mr. Thompson, we're dealing with phenomena that challenge our fundamental understanding of physics. Until we can study this anomaly more thoroughly, we can't rule out any possibilities." The federal investigation had also revealed that the Desert Star Motel was not the only location where such temporal anomalies had been detected. Similar effects had been documented at several other sites across the American Southwest, all of them associated with unexplained disappearances or mysterious preservation of organic materials. "We believe," Agent Woods had explained to the assembled investigators, "that these sites represent natural phenomena that we're only beginning to understand. The preservation of Room 17 may provide crucial insights into the nature of time itself." But for Robert Thompson, the scientific implications had been secondary to the personal ones. The possibility that Jason and Jeremy might still exist somewhere, in some form, had rekindled hope that he had given up decades earlier. "Agent Woods," Robert had said, "if there's any chance that my sons are still alive, even in some altered state, I need to know. I've spent 37 years wondering what happened to them." The investigation had revealed one final piece of evidence that had shaken everyone involved. Hidden behind the bathroom mirror, investigators had found a small collection of photographs and notes that appeared to document the boys' continued existence within the temporal anomaly. The photographs had shown Jason and Jeremy aging gradually, but slowly, over what appeared to be many years. The notes, written in their developing handwriting, had described experiences that defied conventional understanding of reality. "We can see outside sometimes," one note had read. "Mom and Dad look for us, but they can't see us. We want to help them understand, but we can't leave this place. The time here is different, and if we go outside, we might disappear forever." Another note, apparently written years later based on the more mature handwriting, had said, "We've learned that this place is special. There are others here too, people who got lost in time like us. We're not alone, and we're not scared anymore, but we miss our real life." The final note, written in Jeremy's distinctive handwriting but showing the development of an adult vocabulary, had contained instructions. "When people finally find this room, tell them that time isn't what they think it is. Tell them that love can transcend time, and that we're waiting for the moment when we can come home properly." As the federal investigation had continued, it had become clear that Room 17 represented a window into aspects of reality that science was only beginning to explore. The room had been sealed again, but this time with advanced monitoring equipment that would track any changes in the temporal anomaly. Robert Thompson had been allowed to keep copies of the photographs and notes, but the originals had been classified for further study. The old man had returned to Phoenix with more questions than answers, but also with the first real hope he had experienced in 37 years. The discovery at the Desert Star Motel had opened up possibilities that challenged everything investigators thought they knew about missing persons cases, the nature of time, and the boundaries between science and the supernatural. But most importantly, it had suggested that Jason and Jeremy Thompson's story was far from over, and that the truth about their disappearance was stranger and more wonderful than anyone could have imagined. The classified research facility that had been hastily constructed around the Desert Star Motel looked nothing like the abandoned roadside establishment it had been just months earlier. By October 2024, the site had been transformed into one of the most secretive scientific installations in the United States, with equipment worth millions of dollars monitoring every aspect of the temporal anomaly centered on Room 17. Dr. Elizabeth Harper had been appointed as the lead researcher for what had been designated Project Temporal Bridge, a joint operation between the Department of Energy, NASA, and several classified defense agencies. Her team included physicists, temporal theorists, and specialists in dimensional mechanics, fields of study that had barely existed before the discovery at the Desert Star. "What we're dealing with here," Dr. Harper had explained to the assembled team of researchers, "appears to be a naturally occurring Einstein-Rosen bridge, commonly called a wormhole. But instead of connecting different points in space, this bridge connects different rates of temporal flow." The scientific community's understanding of the anomaly had evolved rapidly as more sophisticated equipment had been brought to bear on the phenomenon. The temporal distortion field extended approximately 15 feet in all directions from the center of room 17, creating a bubble where time moved at roughly 1/10 the rate of normal time flow. Inside the field, Dr. Harper had continued, 37 years of external time would be experienced as approximately 3 years and 8 months. This explains the preservation of organic materials and the apparent aging of the Thompson twins, as documented in the photographs and notes we've recovered. But the most significant breakthrough had come when the research team had developed a method for establishing limited communication with whatever existed within the temporal field. Using a combination of quantum entanglement protocols and carefully modulated electromagnetic pulses, they had been able to send simple messages into room 17 and receive responses. The first successful communication had occurred on November 15, 2024, when Dr. Harper's team had transmitted a basic mathematical sequence into the temporal field. Within hours, which would have been minutes within the accelerated time frame of room 17, they had received a response that confirmed the presence of conscious intelligence within the anomaly. "We have established contact," Dr. Harper had announced to the Department of Energy officials who were overseeing the project. "There are definitely conscious entities within the temporal field, and they appear to be capable of complex communication." Robert Thompson had been present at the facility when the first meaningful communication had been established. Despite his advanced age and the emotional strain of the situation, he had insisted on being involved in any attempt to contact his sons. The breakthrough had come when the research team had transmitted Robert's voice, digitally encoded, into the temporal field. The response had been immediate and overwhelming. 2 voices, now clearly those of young men rather than children, responding with joy and recognition. "Dad? Dad? Is that really you?" The voice had been Jeremy's, but deepened and matured beyond what an 8-year-old could produce. "We've been waiting so long for someone to find a way to talk to us," Jason's voice had added. "We knew that someday science would advance enough to establish communication." The conversation that had followed had been both joyful and heartbreaking. Jason and Jeremy, now appearing to be in their early 20s, based on the temporal differential, had explained their experiences within the anomaly over what they had experienced as nearly 4 years. "Dad, we need you to understand," Jeremy had said during that first conversation. "We're not trapped here exactly. We chose to stay after we realized what had happened to us." "What do you mean you chose to stay?" Robert had asked, his voice breaking with emotion. "When we first got caught in the time field," Jason had explained, "we were scared and confused. But we discovered that this place is special. It's not just a temporal anomaly, it's a sanctuary for people who get lost between different states of existence." The twins had described encountering other individuals within the temporal field, people who had disappeared from various locations throughout history and had found refuge in the strange space where time moved differently. "There are others here, Dad," Jeremy had continued, "a man from the 1920s who disappeared during a cross-country drive, a family from the 1960s who vanished during a camping trip, a woman from the 1990s who was driving alone at night, and somehow ended up here. We've learned that these temporal anomalies exist at various points throughout the American Southwest, Jason had added. They seem to be connected to specific geological formations and electromagnetic fields created by mineral deposits deep underground. The scientific team had been fascinated by the twins' descriptions of the temporal field's interior. According to Jason and Jeremy, the space within the anomaly was much larger than Room 17 itself. It contained what appeared to be a pocket dimension where the displaced individuals had created a community. "We have a whole settlement here," Jeremy had explained. "It's like a small town, but outside of normal time. We've built houses, we have gardens, we even have a school where the adults teach the children who end up here." Dr. Harper had been particularly interested in the twins' description of how time flowed within the anomaly. "Jason, Jeremy, can you explain how you experience time differently than we do?" "It's hard to describe," Jason had responded. "We can sometimes see out into your time, like looking through a window. We watch seasons change in minutes. We see years pass in what feels like days to us. But our bodies and minds age normally within our own time frame." "No, we've been here for almost 4 years by our experience," Jeremy had added. "We've grown up here, learned things we never could have learned in normal time. The other people here have taught us about history, science, art, things from their different time periods. The revelation that had shocked everyone involved had come when the twins had explained why they had chosen not to try to return to normal time, even when they had discovered ways to potentially leave the anomaly. "Dad, we learned something important," Jason had said. "If we leave this place, we'll instantly age to match the time that has passed in your world. We would go from being in our early 20s to being 45 years old in a matter of seconds." "The temporal differential can't be reversed safely," Jeremy had explained. "We've seen what happens when people try to leave. Their bodies try to catch up to normal time all at once, and the shock usually kills them." Robert Thompson had broken down upon hearing this explanation. His sons were alive, they were conscious and thriving, but they were effectively trapped in a state where reuniting with their family would likely mean their death. "But there might be another way," Jason had continued after allowing his father time to process the information. "We've been working with the others here, studying the temporal mechanics of this place. We think there might be a way to create a stable interface between our time and yours." The twins had described a theory that the displaced individuals within the anomaly had been developing over subjective decades of study. If the electromagnetic fields generating the temporal distortion could be precisely modulated, it might be possible to create a bridge that would allow safe transition between the different time flows. "We would need very specific equipment," Jeremy had explained. "Electromagnetic field generators that can produce precisely calibrated frequencies, and we would need to coordinate the effort from both sides of the temporal barrier." Dr. Harper and her team had immediately begun working on the technical requirements that the twins had described. The physics involved had been extraordinarily complex, requiring advances in temporal mechanics that pushed the boundaries of current scientific understanding. What they're describing, Dr. Harper had explained to the Oversight Committee, is essentially the creation of a temporal decompression chamber. We would need to create a gradient field that would allow gradual adjustment between the different time flows. The engineering challenges had been immense, but the potential rewards had justified the enormous expense and effort involved. If successful, the project would not only allow the Thompson twins to safely return to normal time, but would also open up revolutionary possibilities for temporal research and the rescue of other individuals trapped in similar anomalies. Construction of the temporal bridge had taken 6 months of intensive work by teams of physicists, engineers, and specialists in electromagnetic field manipulation. The device that had resulted looked like something from science fiction, a complex array of field generators surrounding a chamber that could accommodate 2 people. The process will be gradual, Dr. Harper had explained to Robert Thompson as they prepared for the first attempt to bring Jason and Jeremy home. They'll spend approximately 6 hours in the temporal gradient, allowing their personal time flow to gradually sync with normal time. "Is it safe?" Robert had asked, his voice filled with the anxiety of a father who had already lost his sons once. "We've run every simulation we can devise," Dr. Harper had replied. "The theoretical models suggest that gradual temporal reintegration should be possible without the fatal shock that occurs with instantaneous transition." The first attempt to activate the temporal bridge had taken place on June 20th, 2025, exactly 38 years after Jason and Jeremy Thompson had vanished from room 17. Robert Thompson, now 72 years old, had been present along with Linda Thompson, who had flown in from Portland despite her fragile health. Linda had aged dramatically since losing her sons, and the decades of grief had taken a severe toll on her physical and mental health. But the possibility of reuniting with Jason and Jeremy had given her strength she hadn't felt in years. "Are you ready, boys?" Dr. Harper had asked through the communication link with the temporal anomaly. "We're ready," Jason had responded. "We've said goodbye to the others here. They understand that we need to try to return to our family." "We love you, Dad. We love you, Mom," Jeremy had added. "No matter what happens, we want you to know that we've been happy here and we've never stopped thinking about you." The temporal bridge activation had been unlike anything the scientific observers had ever witnessed. The field generators had created visible distortions in the air around room 17, and monitoring equipment had detected massive fluctuations in local space-time. Gradually, 2 figures had become visible within the temporal gradient chamber, young men in their early 20s who bore unmistakable resemblance to the 8-year-old boys who had vanished 38 years earlier. Jason and Jeremy Thompson, now 20 and 21 years old subjectively, had stood together in the chamber, holding hands as they had as children, their faces showing a mixture of excitement and apprehension as they slowly transitioned back to normal time. The process had taken exactly 6 hours and 17 minutes. At 4:23 p.m. on June 20th, 2025, the temporal bridge had stabilized, and Jason and Jeremy Thompson had stepped out of the chamber and back into normal time. The reunion that had followed had been overwhelming for everyone present. Robert and Linda Thompson had embraced their sons, now young men, with tears of joy and disbelief. The boys had aged naturally during their time in the anomaly, but they had retained their essential personalities and their deep bond with each other. "Mom, Dad," Jason had said as he held his parents, "we have so much to tell you. We've learned things about time and reality that could change how humanity understands the universe." "We brought something back with us," Jeremy had added, producing a device that appeared to be constructed from materials not found on Earth. "The others in the temporal field gave us this. It's a communication device that will allow ongoing contact between our time and theirs." The device had proven to be a breakthrough in temporal communication technology. Using principles that human science was only beginning to understand, it allowed real-time communication between normal time and the various temporal anomalies that existed throughout the Southwest. "There are hundreds of people in these temporal pockets," Jeremy had explained to the assembled scientists. "People who have been displaced throughout history, living in communities outside normal time. They've been waiting for technology to advance enough to establish contact with the outside world." The implications of this revelation had been staggering. The Thompson twins case had not only been solved, but had opened up an entirely new understanding of temporal physics and the possibility of rescue for individuals who had been presumed dead for decades or even centuries. Jason and Jeremy had spent the following months working with Dr. Harper's team to establish communication with other temporal anomalies. They had helped locate and make contact with dozens of displaced individuals, creating what amounted to a rescue network for people trapped outside normal time. "We want to help others the way we were helped," Jason had explained during a press conference that had revealed the existence of temporal anomalies to the public. "No family should have to suffer the way our parents did, wondering what happened to their loved ones." The twins had also worked to help other displaced individuals return to normal time when they chose to do so. The temporal bridge technology had been refined and duplicated, allowing for the safe reintegration of people who had been lost for years or decades. But perhaps most remarkably, Jason and Jeremy had also served as ambassadors to the communities within the temporal anomalies, helping to establish ongoing relationships between the displaced individuals and the outside world. "Some people choose to stay in the temporal fields," Jeremy had explained. "They've built lives there, formed families, created communities. They don't want to return to normal time, but they do want to maintain contact with the outside world." The Desert Star Motel had been converted into a permanent research facility dedicated to temporal physics and interdimensional communication. Room 17, where everything had begun, had been preserved as a monument to the mystery that had revolutionized human understanding of time itself. Robert and Linda Thompson had relocated to California to be close to their sons, who had chosen to dedicate their lives to temporal research and rescue operations. The family had been reunited, but in ways that none of them could have imagined when the boys had first vanished. "People ask us if we regret the time we lost," Jason had said during a documentary about their experience. "But we didn't lose time, we experienced it differently. We learned things about the nature of reality that we never could have learned in normal time. We also learned that love transcends time," Jeremy had added. "Our parents never stopped looking for us, never stopped hoping. That love sustained us during our time in the anomaly and ultimately made our return possible." Today, the Thompson twins' case had become a symbol of hope for families of missing persons around the world. It had proven that sometimes the impossible becomes possible, and that the bonds of family can overcome even the barriers of time itself. But more than that, it had opened up new frontiers in human understanding of the universe. The temporal anomalies of the American Southwest had revealed that time was far more flexible and complex than scientists had previously believed, and that human consciousness could adapt to conditions that challenged fundamental assumptions about reality. The story of Jason and Jeremy Thompson had begun with a mystery that seemed to have no solution. But it had ended with discoveries that expanded the possibilities of human knowledge and offered hope to anyone who had ever lost someone to the unknown. In room 17 of what had once been the Desert Star Motel, monitoring equipment continued to track the temporal anomaly that had preserved two boys for 38 years. But now, instead of being a source of loss and mystery, it had become a gateway to understanding, a bridge between the known and unknown that promised to unlock secrets about the nature of time, space, and human existence itself. The twins, who had vanished from a locked motel room in 1987, had returned as young men in 2025, bringing with them knowledge that would forever change humanity's understanding of what was possible in a universe far stranger and more wonderful than anyone had ever imagined.